The broad canvas of America. New York City, sparkling under the lights. New York City, often described as the city that never sleeps, serves as a breathtaking backdrop where ambition and dreams visibly pulse through the air. Towering skyscrapers glisten against the night sky, their windows aglow like beacons of endless opportunity and restless energy. Down below, Fifth Avenue bustles with yellow cabs darting through streams of pedestrians, their faces lit by neon signs and giant billboards flashing advertisements for the latest fashion, finance, or Broadway show. It is in this dazzling urban labyrinth that the Harper family has built their life. Their penthouse sits atop one of the city's iconic high-rises, high enough that, on clear nights, the skyline seems close enough to touch. From their living room, floor-to-ceiling windows frame panoramic views of Central Park's seasons, shifting or the East River, shining with reflections of city lights. The Harpers aren't merely residents of New York. They are woven into its fabric. The father, a well-known figure on Wall Street, is a regular at black-tie galas in Manhattan's most exclusive venues. The mother, celebrated for orchestrating high-profile charity events, moves with practiced grace through circles of New York's social elite. But with prestige comes pressure. In a city where image matters as much as achievement, the Harper home is meticulously maintained. Every detail from the curated art collections to the imported Italian furniture selected to impress guests from the upper echelons of society. Conversations at the family's dinner table often revolve around new business ventures, social connections, and the relentless pace required to maintain their status. For an outsider, the Harper residence is a symbol of the American dream realized, a place where wealth affords comfort and a sense of invincibility. Yet this glittering penthouse, nestled in the heart of New York's ceaseless rush, is also a cage of expectations, secrets, and unspoken rivalries. The city's light, dazzling as it is, only emphasizes the shadows that fall within the Harper family walls. Main character: Emily Harper, a young lawyer, full of ambition. Emily Harper stands as a remarkable figure, both shaped and challenged by the city's unrelenting drive. At 28, she has already accomplished what many of her peers only dream of, graduating near the top of her class from Harvard Law School. Yet, beneath the surface of awards and accolades, Emily's journey is far more nuanced and complex. A firstborn in a prestigious New York family, Emily was raised in the spotlight from a young age. She learned early on that in the Harper household, achievement was a given, not a goal. Her childhood was filled with private tutors, charity fundraisers, and rehearsed dinner etiquette, her every move a reflection of her parents' aspirations. While friends knew her as diligent and composed, few understood the weight of expectations Emily quietly carried each day. Unlike her younger brother Brandon, who inherited their parents' charm and seemingly effortless confidence, Emily found solace in hard work and intellectual pursuit. Books were her companions. Debate club, mock trials, and legal internships became avenues where she could prove, not just to the world, but to herself, that she belonged. Emily's path to Harvard was paved with all-nighters, a perfectionist's fear of letting anyone down, and a fiercely independent spirit that blossomed in the face of challenge. Harvard, for Emily, was more than just an Ivy League school. It was a sanctuary, a place where her ideas mattered, and her achievements spoke louder than her last name. She formed close bonds with classmates from around the globe, contributed to pro bono legal projects, and found mentors who encouraged her to envision a world beyond boardrooms and upper-crust galas. For the first time, she glimpsed a version of herself defined by her own values rather than her family's ambitions. Returning home to New York after graduation, however, brought Emily face to face with the old pressures she had tried to escape. The penthouse she once viewed as a castle now felt confining, a physical reminder that her hard-won independence was tenuous. Family conversations often pivoted to Brandon's latest ventures or their parents' social calendar, sometimes skirting around Emily's actual desires and dreams. Despite this, Emily remains resilient. Professionally, she carves out both respect and recognition at the Manhattan law firm where she works. She is known for her sharp mind, unwavering ethical standards, and ability to resolve even the most complex legal disputes. Clients seek her out not only for her expertise, but also for the empathy she brings to each case, a rare quality in the cutthroat legal landscape of New York. Emily's private life, however, is a delicate balancing act. Weekends volunteering with local nonprofits provide glimpses of purpose and fulfillment that glitter brighter than any accolade. Yet, in the quiet moments, she faces questions about loyalty, identity, and what it truly means to do the right thing. Questions that will soon demand answers as she uncovers uncomfortable truths within her own family. Emily Harper, in every sense, embodies the modern American woman, ambitious, principled, and bold, yet searching for belonging not just in the city she calls home, but within the walls of her own family. Painful comparisons and the shadow of favoritism. From her earliest memories, Emily Harper's life has been shaped not just by the privileges afforded to her family, but by the relentless undertow of comparison. In the Harper household, every small victory, be it a perfect score on a math test or a ribbon from a school competition, seemed to be weighed against what her younger brother, Brandon, might have accomplished, or even more often, what he might achieve in the future. That unspoken rivalry stretched its tendrils through Emily's childhood like a persistent fog, clouding moments that should have been filled with pride and self-assurance. As the firstborn, Emily was the test case for her parents' ambitions and anxieties. Her mother, always elegant and poised, believed discipline and high expectations would best prepare her daughter for the social and professional gauntlets of Manhattan society. Her father, whose name was synonymous with success on Wall Street, saw in Emily the promise of a legacy, a future CEO, partner, or power broker. Yet, as soon as Brandon entered the family picture, the nature of the game seemed to shift before Emily's eyes. Brandon was born with a smile that charmed nannies, teachers, and dinner party guests alike. Unlike Emily's quiet diligence, Brandon shone in social situations, attracting affection and attention with what seemed to be effortless grace. He was praised for qualities that had never been mentioned in Emily's upbringing. His sense of humor, his charisma, his ability to entertain a room without saying anything of substance. Brandon just lights up a place, their mother would say at family gatherings, her tone lilting with unguarded pride. For Emily, these moments landed heavily. Sitting beside her brother at the dinner table, she would sometimes notice the subtle shift in her parents' eyes, the softening when Brandon recounted an amusing story from school, the indulgent laughter that followed his playful mischief, the parental patience that seemed limitless when he made mistakes. In contrast, Emily felt the air thicken around her whenever she faltered, every error treated as a serious point of correction, every shortcoming discussed with a gravity that seemed to question her very worth. The comparisons weren't always spoken aloud, yet they echoed through the hallways in countless ways. Family friends would remark, Isn't Brandon just the spitting image of his father? Teachers at their elite private schools would gush about Brandon's potential during parent-teacher conferences, where Emily's consistent excellence was shrugged off with, well, of course she's doing well. Even small, everyday moments, a shared joke Emily didn't understand, a spontaneous outing that only included Brandon, reinforced the divide. In the rare moments when Emily tried to voice her discomfort, she was met with gentle dismissal. "We're just pushing you because we know you're capable of greatness," her mother would insist, her tone both encouraging and final, signaling the end of discussion. Her father, behind a wall of affectionate but emotionally distant professionalism, might offer an awkward pat on her shoulder and turn back to his laptop. The message was clear. Her feelings were less important than her performance. This dynamic left deep marks on Emily's psyche. She became fiercely competitive, measuring her self-worth against both her own high standards and the impossible benchmarks set by her parents. Every achievement had to be bigger, better, more impressive. She lost herself in academics, debate club, and future career plans, believing that if she just tried hard enough, she might finally claim the unconditional love she craved. Yet the validation, when it came at all, was often fleeting. A passing remark, a polite nod. Never the enthusiastic, open-armed pride her brother received, as a matter of course. At the same time, Emily grew wary of her brother. Although she loved Brandon in her own way, resentment bloomed quietly within her. She watched as he skated through adolescence with less scrutiny and more freedom, allowed to make mistakes she would have been scolded for, forgiven transgressions that would have been painstakingly analyzed if they had been hers. Family vacations, holiday dinners, even casual Saturdays in the park revolved around making sure Brandon was happy and engaged, while Emily was left to manage her own expectations silently. School only amplified these internal rifts. At their prestigious prep academy on the Upper East Side, where children of CEOs, ambassadors, and celebrities filled the classrooms, the Harper siblings' rivalry played out for an audience. Brandon became the star of the soccer team, drawing crowds to every game. Emily, meanwhile, chaired the Model United Nations and curated the school's literary journal, earning her teachers' respect, but only polite applause from her parents at the end-of-year banquets. Even as Emily racked up scholarships and academic medals, she began to see them as mere stepping stones toward an ever-receding acceptance. Brandon's victories, though fewer and often less substantive, seemed to fill the Harper home with laughter and pride in a way Emily's could not. Often, after a particularly grueling week, Emily would stare out the penthouse window, watching the city's lights flicker, wondering if there was anything she could possibly do to tip the scales in her favor. As they both entered adulthood, the pattern only grew more pronounced. During college breaks, Brandon's questionable choices, party mishaps, missed deadlines, romantic drama were brushed aside as youthful indiscretions or opportunities for growth. Meanwhile, Emily's life at Harvard was discussed primarily through the lens of family gain. How could her latest law review article be leveraged? Which internships would best position her for a lucrative firm in Manhattan? There was little interest in how Emily felt, what she dreamt of, or how she bore the emotional costs of her relentless pursuit of excellence. The impact was not just personal, but psychological. Emily developed a quiet anxiety about never being enough, a shadow that haunted her relationships with friends, colleagues, and mentors. She became cautious, hesitant to trust praise, suspicious of anyone who offered approval too easily, always waiting for the inevitable. silent comparison to someone better. Her perfectionism became both a shield and a burden. It protected her self-esteem in public, but in private, it exacerbated a gnawing sense of inadequacy. Even her relationship with Brandon became colored by this unspoken history. Sometimes, Brandon himself seemed only half aware of the privileges their parents bestowed. He'd tease her for overthinking things, or tell her she needed to lighten up, never grasping the complexity of her emotional landscape. Other times, he'd confide his frustrations over the expectations placed on him, blind to how differently those same expectations had shaped and limited Emily's world. Now, as an adult and a practicing attorney, Emily recognizes the depth of the wounds left by a lifetime of being measured, compared, and overlooked. She has tried to heal on her own terms, through rigorous self-reflection, by seeking mentorships outside her family's influence, and by giving back to the community in ways that have nothing to do with prestige or Brandon. But when favoritism lingers in every phone call, every family event, every coded comment from her parents, it is a ghost not easily exorcised. In many ways, the painful comparisons and shadow of favoritism have defined Emily's pursuit of justice. Her empathy for outsiders, her commitment to fairness, her refusal to let inequity slide. These are forged as much in her own wounds as in her education. Emily Harper is, in part, the woman she is because she spent a lifetime learning what it felt like to be second, even when she was working twice as hard to be first. Earth-shattering discovery. Parental collusion in Brandon's success. Late one rainy Tuesday evening, Emily Harper sat hunched over her laptop at the vast dining table in her family's penthouse. Most nights, she returned home, drained after long hours at the law firm. But this evening was different. Even the city's familiar symphony of honking horns and distant sirens faded into the background as her mind raced with fragments of a strange conversation she'd overheard at dinner a few hours earlier. Her father received an unusually cryptic phone call as dessert was served, a brief exchange in the kind of clipped monotone he reserved for business deals of the highest importance. He'd left the table quickly, but not before Emily had seen the faintest flicker of tension in her mother's eyes. It was a look she recognized from childhood. Secrets, hastily camouflaged beneath polite smiles. Emily's curiosity, always keen, had grown sharper since she became a lawyer. Years of sifting through deposition transcripts and confidential files had trained her not just to notice facts, but to sense when something felt off. Tonight, the feeling was unmistakable. There was something about the sudden, almost rehearsed change of subject afterwards. Her mother inquiring about Brandon's latest project, the investment firm, her father's guarded praise, Brandon's nervous laughter. That left Emily unsettled. The Harper penthouse was immaculate, but Emily knew its hidden corners, both literal and figurative, better than anyone. After everyone retired to their separate rooms, she wandered the silent hallway, her footsteps muffled on plush carpeting. She passed Brandon's door, which was ajar, then her father's office, the only room always locked, before slipping into the den. There, a stack of unfiled documents waited by the printer, the product of her mother's habit of printing everything, just in case. Emily wasn't snooping, exactly. At least, that's what she told herself as she rifled through the pages, looking for anything that explained the odd atmosphere earlier. Instead, she found something she hadn't known she was looking for. An internal memo, thick with corporate jargon, and the letterhead of one of the country's most prominent investment firms, the very place Brandon had landed his coveted new role. Her heart quickened as she scanned the document. There were sections highlighted, references to recommendations, process exceptions, and, most jarringly, a direct email exchange between her father and the firm's managing partner. It was painfully clear. What should have been a highly competitive, transparent hiring process had been quietly circumvented. Her father had leveraged not just family friends, but business leverage and promised investments in exchange for guaranteeing Brandon's job offer. Emily's hands trembled as she read the messages, casual in tone, yet devastating in implication. The clincher wasn't just the job offer itself, but internal notes instructing HR to accelerate Brandon Harper's promotion schedule as discussed. It was nepotism, plain and simple. Worse, it was fraudulently executed under the guise of meritocracy. Brandon wasn't just favored at home. The world, too, was being manipulated in his favor, brick by brick, with her parents laying each stone. A cold anger, sharper than anything she'd felt in years, rose in her chest. She thought of every time she'd watched Brandon celebrate a new accomplishment. Each time their parents boasted about how quickly he was rising through the ranks, it all suddenly tasted hollow, tinged with betrayal.
Oh, no.
Emily had built her own success on the back of sleepless nights and principled choices, determined to prove her worth in a city that demanded everything of its best and brightest. Now she realized the scales had always been tipped in her brother's favor. As Emily pieced through more files, more evidence surfaced to paint a complete, damning picture. There were calendar invites coded innocuously as catch-up lunches that coincided with important decision dates on Brandon's behalf. Check stubs from substantial philanthropic donations made to the company's scholarship fund, timed suspiciously near the promotion deliberations. Follow-up emails that read almost like confessions. We appreciate your discretion and look forward to deepening our partnership. The magnitude was suffocating. The Harpers weren't merely bending the rules for Brandon. They were fundamentally corrupting every principle that Emily, as both a lawyer and a daughter, had been raised to respect. What's more, they were doing it in broad daylight, secure in their wealth and influence. For a long time, Emily sat motionless. She remembered her father's favorite advice about playing the game smart. Words he'd given her during every career crossroads. She remembered her mother insisting, when Emily was 16 and heartbroken over losing a school award, that the right doors always open for good families. She'd always known her parents played by their own rules, but she'd wanted to believe that their ambition had its limits. The discovery was more than a personal betrayal. It was a shattering of the values she'd patterned her identity around. Emily felt herself torn between the rage of the whistleblower and the sadness of a child who still longed for her parents' approval. How many chances had been stolen from more deserving candidates just so Brandon could be ushered into an office with a view? How often had her parents lied to her face about fairness and hard work? Through her law training, Emily understood the legal and ethical implications. What stunned her most was the way her family had rationalized it all. This is how the world works for people like us. Emily saw, in those discarded memos and emails, the machinery of privilege, silent, unseen, and relentless. The rest of the night, Emily could barely sleep. She stared at the ceiling as the city lights bled through her curtains, replaying every childhood memory with fresh eyes. The casual dismissals, the double standards, the way her own milestones had always been overshadowed by Brandon's potential. Now she understood. At every turn, her parents' quiet collusion had molded not just Brandon's future, but her own sense of worth. By dawn, the fog of shock gave way to something else entirely: resolve. Emily vowed not just to confront her parents, but to do so with the meticulous integrity that defined her. She began to organize her findings, documenting every incriminating detail. She knew what it would cost. Her image as the good daughter, likely the fragile piece of her family. But she could not unsee the truth, nor could she go back to pretending the Harper name meant anything if it came at the price of honesty. It was the first step in a chain of choices that would redefine not only her relationship with her family, but also her understanding of justice, loyalty, and the heavy price of privilege. A courageous decision, using the law to pursue justice. Emily Harper's hands trembled as she closed the file folder, the weight of her discovery pressing against her chest like a physical force. In the dim hush of the penthouse, her mind raced with competing instincts, protecting her family, preserving the Harper name, or honoring the ethical core that had guided her through every trial, every pro bono case, and every late-night study session at Harvard. This was a crossroads unlike any she'd faced before. The stakes were not a client's freedom, nor the reputation of a law firm, but the soul of her own family, and, she realized, her own sense of self. For hours that night, Emily paced the confines of her room, replaying memories and possibilities. She knew the price of maintaining silence, watching as undeserved privilege continued to flourish, while the values that shaped her crumbled to dust. Yet the alternative, exposing her family's wrongdoing, inviting public scandal, and shattering relationships, felt like standing on the edge of an abyss. She had defended justice in the abstract, but could she face it when it meant turning her back on blood? The answer came slowly, raw and resolute. Emily thought of the countless times she had comforted young clients whose lives were ruined by systems manipulated by the powerful. She'd promised them, and herself, that fairness mattered, not just in theory, but in practice. To step back now would be the ultimate act of hypocrisy. Emily's sense of justice had been forged by her own pain. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, and rendered invisible within her own family. In this moment, her quiet suffering had prepared her for the most difficult case of her career, against the Harpers themselves. Determined, Emily began with the only tools she trusted: precision, discretion, and law. She set out to meticulously collect every piece of evidence, knowing that sentiment or half-truths would not stand should the issue ever reach court. She combed through emails between her father and the company's executives, seeking out clues in schedules and donation ledgers. Each piece of proof was cataloged, cross-referenced, and securely stored away from prying eyes. It was an act of discipline she had practiced for years in litigation, now turned toward her own flesh and blood. But the task was not hers alone. Emily understood the peril in pursuing justice as a lone crusader, not just for her own protection, but for the weight her accusations would need to carry. Quietly, she reached out to her most trusted confidant from law school, Diana, now an investigative journalist working for a major New York paper. They had worked together on reform cases, and Diana's unwavering integrity further encouraged Emily's resolve. Their first meetings were held far from Manhattan's glass towers, in Brooklyn coffee shops and tucked-away corners of the city. Using encrypted apps, they shared files, timelines, and legal strategy, building a narrative that would be unassailable in the face of denials, threats, or intimidation. It was not lost on Emily that the very privacy and privilege that protected her family also gave her the resources to strike at their armor. Every late-night drafting session, every scanned document, was a reckoning with her upbringing, a mingling of sorrow and righteous anger. She attended to her responsibilities at the law firm as best she could, but the strain became apparent to those around her. Friends commented on her drawn expression. Her supervisor noted her distraction. Yet Emily could not confide in them. The price of the truth, she knew, was isolation. Despite her careful planning, Emily struggled with doubt and guilt. Memories of family vacations, her mother's gentle touch on feverish foreheads, and her father's rare expressions of pride twisted inside her like barbed wire. But these memories warred with the stark reality of what they had done. Not just to her, but to the world. She pictured the 50 other candidates passed over for Brandon's position. Young people who lacked the invisible hand of privilege. It was in these moments of darkness that Emily's conviction crystallized. She realized that justice, to be of any value, must sometimes begin at home. If she could not challenge wrongdoing within her own four walls, how could she presume to expose it elsewhere? The law could be more than just a career. It could be a shield for those denied opportunity, and a sword wielded against the systems that substituted birthright for merit. Her strategy was twofold. First, she built a legal case watertight enough to withstand the scrutiny of both courts and the public eye. Second, with Diana's help, she prepared a comprehensive expose, complete with timelines, sourced communications, and financial records. They debated endlessly about how to balance the public interest with compassion for her family, omitting personal details that would only serve to humiliate rather than illuminate wrongdoing. Emily rehearsed the confrontation dozens of times in her mind. She pictured her father's thunderous denial, her mother's anguished explanations, Brandon's confusion and outrage. There would be tears, raised voices, threats, but she reminded herself, again and again, that family cannot be a shield against responsibility. The legacy she wanted from her family was not one of unearned privilege, but one of honesty and courage. The week before the truth broke, Emily found herself walking aimlessly through Central Park. The city's energy, the laughter of children, the joggers, the chatter of friends, reminded her of the world beyond penthouses and boardrooms. She realized that the courage she needed was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to push on despite it. She recalled lessons from mentors, the strength she had gained supporting survivors of injustice, and the words of a professor she'd admired. True justice often begins when you risk losing everything you thought defined you. In the quiet of those pre-dawn hours, Emily finalized her preparations. The files were secure. Diana's article was nearly ready for publication. Emily drafted a short, handwritten letter to her parents, explaining not just what she had found, but why she could not stay silent. She left it in their study, a single graceful page that hurt more to write than any legal brief. On the morning the story broke, Emily watched the city come awake as she never had before, aware that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. She felt exposed, raw, strangely alive. The phone calls began immediately, a tidal wave of shock, betrayal, threats of legal action, and public fallout. But beneath the tumult was a sense of clarity and peace she hadn't felt since childhood. Emily understood that regardless of the outcome, she had answered the call to integrity. Justice was never abstract. It started with the choices we make, especially when those choices cost us the most. The truth unveiled, and painful consequences the day Emily decided to expose the truth. A storm seemed to settle over Manhattan, one strangely in sync with the turmoil within the Harper penthouse. The city outside bustled as always, oblivious to the brewing chaos inside a home that, for decades, had stood as a symbol of prestige and impenetrable success. Beneath the polished surface, however, Everything was primed to unravel. In a matter of hours, a tightly guarded family secret would explode, sending shockwaves through not only the Harper household, but also the elite circles of New York's business and social worlds. The story, meticulously documented by both Emily and her confidant Diana, broke on a prominent investigative news site on a gray, drizzling morning. The headline was impossible to ignore. Wall Street dynasty accused of nepotism, corruption in major corporate scandal. Within minutes of publication, the article began trending across social media platforms, with journalists, critics, and industry insiders dissecting every detail. Hidden beneath boardroom deals and philanthropic gestures lay a history of carefully orchestrated favoritism, illegal leverage, and back-channel maneuvering, all to ensure Brandon Harper's success. The first response came from within the penthouse. Brandon, his confidence shattered, paced anxiously between the living room and his bedroom, glued to his phone as a relentless torrent of calls from his company, friends, and reporters came through. Within hours, the investment firm that had once hailed Brandon as a rising star suspended him, pending an internal investigation. The board moved quickly, desperate to stem the public relations bloodbath. Brandon's name, once associated with charm, potential, and promise, became synonymous with disgrace and scandal. Years of carefully crafted reputation dissolved in an instant, casting him into a darkness he'd never known before. Their parents were no less devastated. Mr. Harper, once so calm and calculating, now paced in a cold fury, first denying, then catastrophizing, then falling into stunned silence. For a man who had built his identity on control, the sensation of the world turning against him was intolerable. His professional network, sensing blood in the water, began to cut ties and distance themselves. Former friends and business partners made frantic calls, demanding explanations or hints of damage control. Invitations to events evaporated. Offers to collaborate were rescinded. Mrs. Harper, the tireless orchestrator of charitable galas and social events, found herself abruptly unwelcome within circles that had, until then, orbited around her. Even longtime allies in the city's philanthropic world hesitated to return her calls, unsure of how not to be implicated themselves. Rumors swirled at every social club and private luncheon, whispered beneath the din of crystal glasses and muffled laughter. Friends, who had once praised her taste and influence, now scrutinized her every move, their faces tight with suspicion or poorly disguised schadenfreude. The entire family structure buckled beneath the strain. In the tense hours and days that followed the article's release, blame ricocheted throughout the penthouse. Brandon, tormented by a sense of betrayal, lashed out in confusion, first at Emily for her disloyalty, then at his parents for dragging him into their schemes. "You never let me earn a thing myself. How was I supposed to know?" he shouted during one argument, the words echoing off the marble floors and into the spaces where affection used to live. Mr. Harper attempted to maintain order, but every effort at reason crumbled beneath the enormity of their exposure. "I did it for you, all of you," he insisted, voice raw and desperate. Mrs. Harper, accustomed to smoothing over discord with warmth and hospitality, found herself unable to feign composure. Tearful and exhausted, she accused Emily of destroying what little remained of their family. "Couldn't you have given us a chance to explain?" She wept, unable to comprehend how everything had slipped from her grasp. Emily, meanwhile, moved through these confrontations with a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. The storm around her was precisely what she had feared. Yet she clung to the conviction that truth, once revealed, could never be truly regretted. Still, the cost was heavier than she had ever imagined. Every family argument, every look of pain or accusation, every reminder of the affection that once bound them, felt like a wound reopening. Beyond the walls of the penthouse, the repercussions continued to spiral. The media, relentless in its appetite for scandal, unearthed even older stories of favoritism. Small, forgotten discretions, and questionable donations, now scrutinized in a harsher light. The Harpers became cautionary tales at the city's best schools. "Do you think they'll keep their apartment?" whispered doormen and neighbors in the lobby. Dinner conversations among the elite shifted subtly, from envy to pity, and relief that their own skeletons were not yet exposed. Legal investigations picked up steam. Regulatory agencies, spurred by both public outrage and the mounting evidence provided by Emily, started formal proceedings against the investment firm involved, as well as potential sanctions against Mr. Harper's business ventures. Attorneys debated possible criminal charges, not just for the adults, but also for Brandon, if it could be proven he was an active participant. The family's lawyers advised silence, but in a city that thrived on gossip and headlines, the Harpers quickly became pariahs. Yet, perhaps the sharpest consequences were not those determined by law or public opinion, but by the private agony that now suffused the family. Trust, once taken for granted, became almost impossible. Holidays that had once brought a fragile peace now loomed like battlegrounds. Brandon, unmoored and humiliated, considered leaving the country altogether. Mrs. Harper retreated into herself, shutting out former friends and family alike. Mr. Harper focused obsessively on strategy, first for damage control, then merely for survival. For Emily, the aftermath was a daily act of balancing heartbreak with principle. She isolated herself, staying at a modest rented apartment far from the skyline she had once seen as a symbol of unachievable perfection. Some nights she lay awake, torn between the rightness of her decision and the devastation it left in its wake. She missed, with terrible longing, the small rituals of family life, even as she knew those rituals had always rested on a lie. Yet slowly, beneath the wreckage, something new began to take shape. The city, immense and indifferent, carried on, offering anonymous comfort that Emily found oddly soothing. Colleagues quietly expressed admiration for her courage. Some members of the public, particularly those who'd felt the sting of unfairness in their own lives, reached out with gratitude and support. In rare moments of calm, Emily sensed that, while her family might never return to what it had been, she had given herself, and perhaps even her brother, a chance at a more honest future. The truth, once revealed, reshaped everything. Relationships shattered, reputations fell, old certainties disappeared. It was brutal, noisy, and public, but beneath the pain, a stubborn light flickered. Emily knew that out of destruction, something better might one day be rebuilt. Until then, she could live with her choice, carrying the scars as symbols not only of loss, but of a hard-won, necessary integrity. Liberation, Emily's new journey. The dust had barely settled in the aftermath of the Harper scandal, before Emily found herself standing at the threshold of a life unrecognizable from everything she had ever known. The penthouse, once her gilded cage, now loomed large and empty, a mausoleum for the person her parents had hoped she would always be, with a single suitcase and a few keepsakes. Her father's old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a childhood photo with her mother, a handwritten letter from a law professor who'd mentored her at Harvard. Emily stepped into the damp, humming streets of Brooklyn to begin her own chapter. The transition was both exhilarating and terrifying. Gone were the gleaming marble foyers and private elevators, the constant hum of household staff, the muted luxury in every detail. Emily's new apartment was humble by Manhattan standards. A narrow walk-up with creaking floorboards and a view across a tangle of rooftop gardens. The rent came out of her own salary. Every bill, every errand, every small inconvenience reminded her that she was finally responsible for herself and no longer insulated by the quiet machinery of family wealth. Yet in the modest chaos of her new home, Emily felt a relief so profound she sometimes mistook it for loneliness. Each morning, as she brewed her own coffee and walked the mosaic of Brooklyn's streets, she marveled at the anonymity. She slipped into subway crowds without a glance. The neighbors in her building knew nothing of the Harper legacy or the scandal plastered over last month's headlines. Here, she was simply Emily. No legacy to uphold, no comparisons to endure, no expectations to suffocate her ambition. The early days were restless. Emily kept busy, determined to prove, to herself, more than anyone, that she could shape a meaningful existence outside her family's shadow. She returned to her job at the law firm, this time with a steely sense of independence. She requested more pro bono cases focusing on workplace fairness, discrimination, and whistleblower protection. The irony was not lost on her. She had become a champion for people whose stories mirrored her own, battling corrupt systems and power imbalances that echoed those within her family. Each client she helped, each injustice she fought, became a step on her path to healing. Outside work, Emily sought out new communities, joining book clubs at neighborhood cafes, attending public lectures on legal reform, and volunteering at a legal aid clinic for immigrant families. These experiences, far removed from the rarefied air of her old gala circuit, gave her a sense of connection she had never felt before. She built a careful circle of friends, artists, teachers, other young professionals, who valued her humor, insight, and authenticity, not her last name or pedigree. For the first time, she found herself laughing freely, sharing her struggles, and embracing vulnerability without fear of judgment or comparison. Still, freedom was hard-won, and Emily carried invisible scars. Some days, grief for her fractured family felt like a heaviness she could not shake. She worried about Brandon, who had withdrawn into sullen silence after the story broke, and about her parents, whose world had collapsed under the truth she had unleashed. Holiday seasons were the hardest. The rituals and traditions she'd grown up with now seemed hollow, yet their absence opened old wounds. In quieter moments, she sometimes reached for her phone, fingers hovering over her mother's number, longing for comfort and dreading confrontation. But gradually, new rituals emerged. Emily discovered a love of running, pounding out her anxiety along Prospect Park's winding paths. On Saturdays, she wandered farmers' markets with friends, sampling cheeses and swapping stories. She took up journaling, something she hadn't done since high school, filling notebook after notebook with reflections on justice, forgiveness, and identity. In these honest pages, Emily began to forgive herself, not for exposing her family, but for the years of resentment, silence, and self-doubt she had carried like armor. Therapy also became part of her journey, a space to unpack the tangled threads of loyalty, guilt, and freedom. With the help of a compassionate therapist, Emily learned to recognize that her sense of duty to her family did not outweigh her responsibility to herself and to the truth. She grieved the loss of her place in the Harper dynasty, but also discovered satisfaction in the hard, slow work of rebuilding trust with Brandon, who slowly reached out through awkward, tentative texts and the occasional late-night phone call. Their path to reconciliation was not linear, but Emily clung to the hope that honesty would, in time, nurture a more genuine sibling bond. At work, Emily's reputation became rooted, not in her surname, but in her courage. Colleagues treated her with a wary respect. Some admired her, others offered distance, but all recognized the quiet strength necessary to do what she had done. She was invited to speak at law school, panels about ethics, overcoming personal adversity, and the price of integrity in high-stakes careers. Though public attention sometimes made her uncomfortable, each engagement affirmed that her actions had struck a chord beyond her own story. One of the unexpected gifts of her new life was her friendship with Diana, the journalist who had championed her cause. Together, they organized forums for young professionals confronting ethical dilemmas, sharing resources, strategies, and encouragement. Emily became a mentor to interns and junior associates, fiercely advocating for transparency and fair play. If she sensed a young woman being overlooked or a working-class client marginalized, she was quick to intervene, determined to break cycles of silence and favoritism. Starting in the spaces she now called home. Freedom, Emily discovered, was not a destination, but a continuous process of choosing truth over comfort, self-respect over acceptance. There were setbacks, difficult conversations with her parents that went nowhere, pangs of nostalgia for the dazzling view from the penthouse, awkward headlines that flared up and then faded away. But each time she dug her heels in, declining family, invitations to rekindle ties on superficial terms, speaking out against workplace inequities, or simply getting out of bed on the toughest mornings, she felt the bonds of her old life loosen, replaced by a deeper, steadier confidence. Autumn arrived, and with it, Emily's first year in Brooklyn drew to a close. As she stood among friends at a rooftop barbecue, watching the sun dip behind Manhattan's skyline, she realized just how far she had come. Not just in distance, but in spirit. She was no longer just the daughter or the sister, weighed down by secrets and silent comparisons. She was a woman of her own making, tested and transformed by the cost of doing what was right. Emily understood now that liberation was not merely escape, but the courage to live with authenticity, even when it meant losing almost everything she once took for granted. In the mosaic of her new routines, relationships, and beliefs, she caught glimpses of a hard-won joy, the possibility of building a life that was honest, imperfect, and entirely her own.